I'd first like to thank Prabhu and Ellen for being tremendous partners. This has been a very exciting project for us. And part of the reason why it has been so exciting is to be able to work with Prabhu and Ellen, who are just perfect intellectual partners and partners who also know when to push us and when to back off and let us run with things. You can never ask for a more ideal partnership than this particular set of partners on this. I'd like to thank the Gates Foundation too for inspiring us to do this, and because it is a very unusual project. And it is a project that it takes a brave set of actors to go about and do it. And I would like to thank the Foundation for having the vision to follow through on the Millions Saved work and go for the Millions Fed work. I should caution you that there are a lot of people out there who are now very interested in millions something, something, something. So you should be ready for a set of proposals to come your way. On a more serious note, this is not my project. This is a project with several colleagues here. Let me briefly introduce them. David Spielman. David is a research fellow at IFPRI in our Knowledge, Capacity and Innovation Division based in Addis Ababa. And David assured the research quality of this project. Two of our team members are Kanda Cunningham and Sivan Yosef, and they're both senior research assistants with IFPRI and devoted full time to this project. With us is one colleague also who is not here, is Klaus von Grebmer, Director for Communications. This is a research and communications project. We have invested considerably in the communications of solid research. And what I'd like to make is also one more point. Besides Prabhu and Ellen over here and the Gates Foundation, a long time before that was the Millions Saved work. And Ruth Levine from that team was also on the Millions Fed Advisory Committee. And we benefited considerably from an advisory committee that helped hold our feet and helped guide us. So it's very much a large team effort. David and I will present highlights of the findings from Millions Fed. And let me begin with a 1-minute video that gives highlights.
Imagine a world without hunger, without poverty. It can be done. In a world of many different challenges, each in its own time and place. With countless groups of people, all bound by food insecurity, comes a diverse collection of success stories of triumph over hunger and poverty. An array of success stories from all over the world, gathered and scientifically assessed. The impacts are millions fed, globally, regionally, and nationally. Farmers, scientists, civil society groups and politicians discovering solutions to agricultural challenges through science and technology, leadership, communities taking a stand, and collaboration. Join us in learning about these stories, which are only the beginning, a seed of hope in turning the impossible into the possible.
Ladies and gentlemen, if you think back in the late 1950s, about 1 billion people, or about 1/3 of the world's population, were going hungry. Over the 5 decades that followed, policymakers, scientists, extension agents, farmers, and many others took action to boost agricultural production and productivity. They did it by bringing modern science to bear on agriculture, by constructing and rehabilitating irrigation systems and rural road networks, by promoting cultivation practices that conserved water, soil, and forests, and by introducing public policies to encourage the production of more and better food. In short, they improved the availability, access, and quality of food over that 50-year period. Those are the 3 pillars of food security. Today, about 1 billion people still go hungry, and the result may look like failure. If you think about it, it really is. 1 billion people still food insecure is a global tragedy. But from another angle, the result is an astounding success. The absolute number of people who are hungry today has remained unchanged, while the relative proportion of the hungry has decreased substantially as the world's population has doubled since the 1950s. So today, over 5 billion people are food secure, a result that is greatly attributable to successes in agricultural development. Unfortunately, these successes are often overshadowed by the gloom and the doom, by the calamities and the crises that play out in our newspapers, or on our radios, and on our televisions. So, to get at this issue, the Millions Fed initiative was designed to identify and assess interventions in agricultural development that have substantially reduced hunger and malnutrition. It was designed to document and synthesize evidence on where, when, and how the interventions have succeeded. And it was designed to share lessons that can help inform and improve policy and investment decisions in agriculture in the future. It builds on a lot of previous efforts. This isn't the first compilation on success stories in agriculture, but it's truly unique in the sense that we brought together rigorous evidence on large-scale successes, something that's never really been done before. So let me just give you a quick overview of how we proceeded in this project. And the first thing we did was throw the net out. We put out a global call for nominations. We held a wide-ranging series of expert interviews and consultations, and we had a far-reaching review of the literature on agricultural development. Ultimately, we identified about 250 potential success stories, if you will, in agricultural development. We started sorting this catch using a pretty firm criteria set. First, we said, obviously, the intervention must have occurred in a developing country, and it must tackle an important food security issue or challenge. Second, we said that the intervention must exist at some considerable scale of operation, large scale, not a pilot project, not a local district level experiment, but something at scale. Then we said that, of course, the intervention should have been implemented, say, within the last 50 years, and been in existence long enough to have accumulated some evidence of impact. We said the intervention must be in some way sustainable. That could be socially, politically, environmentally, or, of course, economically. And most importantly, we said that the intervention must be supported by well-documented, rigorous evidence of measurable impact on food security. So with guidance and insight from our advisory group, from Prabhu, from Ellen, from many others, we narrowed this list down and commissioned technical studies to synthesize and assess the evidence for each case. There are 20 of them. These commissioned studies were rigorously peer-reviewed, and what we're sharing with you today are the highlights of some of these studies that are compiled in the book, which you'll find in the back. These are the 20 proven successes highlighted by the Millions Fed initiative. They're rich and diverse in nature. They vary in terms of time, space, and character. They're global in some cases, they're regional, they're national, and they're always local. And they're illustrative of a wide range of pathways to success. Of course, we recognize that there are many other successes in agricultural development that are not covered here. It's not an exhaustive volume. In some cases, there are successes that are still relatively small, waiting to be scaled up. In other cases, successes, they're just too recent, or they haven't withstood the test of time. And in other cases, the successes are real, but they're not yet documented or evaluated or validated. To this end, we hope that this work, Millions Fed, will also stimulate new efforts to identify, document, and substantiate successes that are still out there or in the making. I think it's worth noting here how the pathways to success highlighted in Millions Fed illustrate change over space and change over time. And I'll just go through this very briefly. 50 years ago, when we thought about agricultural development, what did we think about? With the Green Revolution, we thought about intensifying food staple production. It was all about putting more wheat and rice on the plates of poor consumers, especially in those regions where poverty was highly concentrated, such as South Asia. in Southeast Asia. Since that time, the thinking and the reality and the successes have diversified to a certain degree. Beginning in the 1970s, there was a lot more focus on community-driven and environmentally sustainable interventions. Forestry and reclamation of land from desertification and whatnot. And come the 1980s, we got into the whole issue of market-oriented or market-driven interventions, where people were able to benefit in terms of greater incomes or greater value from agriculture. During that period, we also saw a diversification out of food staples. No longer was the story necessarily about wheat, rice, maize, but it also went into fruits, vegetables, legumes, dairy, livestock, and even fisheries. We've also seen a shift, probably in the last 20 years, from viewing agriculture and smallholder agriculture as that lagging sector in development to understanding it as a driver of economic growth. And that's a big change. As a result, we've seen a lot of policies, a lot of policy reforms that have focused on agriculture from the perspective of trade policy, fiscal policy, property rights law, even monetary policy. So you see policy has become increasingly important to what we viewed simply as a productivity issue maybe 50 years ago. Finally, and much more recently, we've seen an effort to address food quality and nutrition with interventions that promote the cultivation and consumption of healthy, micronutrient-rich crops and livestock. It's a much more recent change. I think it's still evolving, but we do, in fact, have successes in that realm. So let me highlight 3 successes to give you a flavor of what's in this volume, what's in Millions Fed. The first one is on maize in southern and eastern Africa. This is an area where the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation has invested extensively, both directly through several very important breeding programs in this region, and indirectly through the Alliance for a Green Revolution in Africa, AGRA. Interestingly, the story we're presenting here is not an equivocal success. This isn't something, if you live, say, in Kenya, Malawi, Zambia, or Zimbabwe, you wake up in the morning and say, we've really wiped out hunger because of this. But it is a success for a limited period of time, and that's an important point to illustrate, that not all successes, were eternal. Some things happened just for a limited part of time, in this case from 1965 to about 1990. To give you a character of what happened, in these 4 countries, maize breeders, some of whom had been working in the region from the 1930s, developed maize varieties and hybrids and marketed them to farmers to such an extent that maize eventually replaced some of the lower productivity crops in the region like millet and sorghum as the main food staple. As these countries transitioned in the 1960s from colonialism to independence, they were not only able to preserve the science, to preserve the breeding programs, but they were also able to extend the gains from breeding to a larger number of smallholders. Whereas originally, especially in countries like Kenya and Zimbabwe, and to a certain extent Zambia, they were concentrated in colonial farms, large-scale farming, and things like that. But with the coming of independence, things moved out to smallholders much more rapidly. These improved maize varieties and hybrids in the region contributed significantly to raising yields from between 1% and 5% annually between 1965 and 1990. Growth rates in yields that compare favorably to the United States and other countries in the industrial world. Maize became the primary crop for subsistence production and a driver of local agro-industry. And today, maize accounts for about 75% of all land under cereal cultivation in these 4 countries. The story ends in about the early 1990s, when economic and political crises in the region basically decimated maize breeding programs in all 4 countries. Brain drain, funding cuts, poor economic management, structural adjustment programs during the 1980s. All of these things combined and came together to really slow down the pace of maize improvement in these regions, which is, of course, why the Gates Foundation is investing in this area. So it was an equivocal success. It's something that happened for 15 years, but something that had a major impact when it did succeed. Let me talk about another area, in fact, where the Gates Foundation is also investing. This is in Asia, in the area known as the Indo-Gangetic Plain, which cuts across Pakistan, India, Nepal, and Bangladesh. Since the Green Revolution in the 1960s and 1970s, this region has seen a steady and slow but steady stagnation of yields for the major crops such as rice and wheat, which are grown as rotation or relay crops. The region has suffered from, I guess, a complex combination of stresses associated with the intensification from the Green Revolution. The overuse of chemical inputs such as fertilizers and pesticides, the overuse of groundwater, which is a scarce resource in the Indo-Gangetic Plain, misuse of scarce electricity, high dependence on public subsidies, so on and so forth. So the Green Revolution technologies played an important role, and policies played an important role in increasing the availability of food, but there have been a lot of environmental downsides, and people recognize that in this day and age. Zero or minimum tillage is one way of addressing this issue by using crop residues, specialized machinery, and other management techniques to conserve water, moisture, and soil fertility. The impact is astounding. In the Indo-Gangetic Plain area, over 620,000 farmers have adopted some form of zero tillage. For those of you from the Midwest United States or from Argentina and Brazil, this is actually used for the production of soybean and wheat and lots of other crops. But it's never been adapted to a smallholder economy like the Indo-Gangetic Plain. So, the impact has been astounding. It's a whole new technology and cultivation approach. We're talking about almost 2 million hectares in the region. And the benefits in terms of cost savings for farmers amount to about $340 per household just for wheat cultivation. So the potential of this is well evidenced, well proven, and the scale is quite significant. The scale and spread of zero tillage and other conservation agriculture approaches can't be underestimated, especially given our newfound commitment to mitigating and managing the threats of climate change. Then the third example is something that I think a lot of us give much thought to, whether it's on the Gates Foundation current agenda, I don't know, but it's about desertification, natural resource management, and holding back the environmental damage of something like the spread of the Sahara. This takes place going back to about the 1980s in Burkina Faso and southern Niger, the central plateau of Burkina Faso and southern Niger. Communities and households were recognizing that repeated droughts and failures in large government development projects were threatening their very existence. The lack of rainfall, the barren crusted soils, the disappearing forests were robbing communities of their key sources of income and livelihood. So with the help of community leaders and non-governmental organizations, communities in these two regions began to take action to change their fate. They developed, for instance, planting pits to trap rainwater and organic waste in which to cultivate millet and sorghum. They constructed stone bunds or barriers to trap and hold soil and rainwater runoff to improve the fertility of their fields. And then they regenerated their traditional trees and forests to provide fruit, fodder, firewood, and fuel for consumption and for sale. Between the early 1980s and today, we're talking about something that's not a small success, it's rather large. 5 million hectares have been regenerated by communities and community organizations between the central plateau of Burkina Faso and southern Niger. And we're talking about additional resources in terms of income and food production to feed an estimated 3 million people. So you see, these aren't small successes. Each one has a fairly significant scale of impact.